Hey, this is Jim Musgrave, and welcome back to another episode of Retirement Insights. I got special guest Becky Swansburg, the CEO of Stonewood Financial. If you didn't see the last episode, you don't want to miss it. Go to YouTube and go and watch that. But, you know, in our last episode, we talked a lot about how taxes will most likely go up, not only for the rich, but also for the middle class. And we talked about different types of risk. We talked about tax risk and legislative risk and lots of stuff. But, you know, in this episode, I really want to talk a little bit more about, you know, how the deficits can affect our retirement. And you know, let's kind of start a little bit about kind of how we got there. Now, again, I think every every presidency has added to the national deficit, but just staying recent, you know, to the Biden administration. Now we had, you know, this Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act, and we've had 1.2 trillion on that. Well, we've had student loan forgiveness. We've had all sorts of things, and what we're funding Ukraine and Israel in terms of these wars. And so, I mean, it's just like just billions here and billions there, and all of a sudden it adds up to be real money. And so we are spending quite a lot of money. In fact, we're spending more than we're bringing in tax revenue. And so there's all sorts of acts that have been enacted that just can keep on adding to the debt. And I love going to usdebtclock.com, and you can see that, you know, we're well over $34 trillion. In fact, Becky, when I started doing my Social Security seminars like 8 years ago, it was about 19 trillion. And that was over 34.
30. It was just a few months ago.
Crazy. So it just keeps on, it's just snowballs, gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So I encourage you guys to go, if you haven't been to usdebtclock.org, go there and just get blown away. But, you know, there's been lots of talk. I mean, one of the best sources, as you know, Becky, is the Congressional Budget Office. And again, perpetually rising debt would also increase the likelihood of a fiscal crisis and pose other risks to the U.S. economy. So basically, this debt is unsustainable. And it's been that way for quite some time. Yeah. So anyway, I got this from you. So this is, so again, if you guys don't know Becky, she is a legislative geek, and I mean that in a loving way. I love that about you.
The best kind of geeks, yeah.
Yeah, but that's okay. But if you go literally to the CBO.gov, you can download this report, and it basically just kind of talks about, you know, money in and money out. So do you have any thoughts? Maybe I'll just kind of turn it over to you.
I do. All right. So it is interesting, Jim. You know, none of this is a secret. Every year, as this report shows, the Congressional Budget Office puts out full data on every dollar the government took in and every dollar that the government spent. It's all public information for us to consume. And it paints a picture that I believe all U.S. savers need to pay attention to. And here's why. So fiscal year 2023, the most recent year we have complete data for from the CBO. In 2023, that fiscal year, our government took in $4.4 trillion in revenue, primarily through individual income taxes, which contributed more than half of all the revenue the government takes in. Now, $4.4 trillion is a lot of money, unless, of course, you spend more than $4.4 trillion a year. And of course, that's exactly what's happening. But what I think is important for us to recognize is not just overall government spending, but some very specific areas of government spending that cause me a lot of concern. Mm-hmm. And that's really about this total non-discretionary spending. Now, non-discretionary, or sometimes we call it mandatory spending, is spending that Congress does not control. So this is things like Medicare and Social Security. These are just spending that is codified into current law.
Right.
It also includes things like interest on our federal debt. Mm. What was so interesting and alarming to me to see in the fiscal year 2023 numbers was that our non-discretionary spending alone, let's say Congress didn't exist, they never voted on a single piece of spending. We spent $4.4 trillion just as what is codified into law. So every dollar that we brought in last year, the government had spent before Congress even met. Now, of course, Congress did meet, and that's what we call discretionary spending. And it's easy to say Congress spends too much money. But a lot of that spending is things that we need. It's military and defense spending, transportation and infrastructure spending, all sorts of things. When you add it all together, the government spent last year about $6.1 trillion. And anyone who's taken third grade math and can do subtraction can see the problem. It leaves us with about a $1.7 trillion gap year after year. And that's what's driving the debt every year and the federal deficit overall, or the deficit every year and the federal debt overall.
Right.
So what does that mean for savers? Why does it matter for retirees? Well, when we look at where Congress can change what's going on in that spending equation, mandatory programs, the two largest things driving them are Social Security and Medicare. And as this slide shows, we have more U.S. population age 65 plus. It is growing at the fastest rate since the 1800s.
Right.
Probably mandatory spending is going to grow and not even stay the same. So we can't really affect change there. On the discretionary side, Congress has not really shown an appetite for dramatically decreasing their spending. And even with minor decreases, it still doesn't narrow this $1.7 trillion gap between what we take in and what we spend. Remember, all of that money this year was spent just on these mandatory programs. So if Congress can't control mandatory spending and it can't control discretionary spending, the only place that it can affect that equation is to generate more revenue. And that's why I truly believe that taxes, we are entering into a rising tax environment for most higher net worth U.S. savers who have done a good job saving and earning. It's just because the government needs more money, and that tax reform is going to have to be pretty broad based to generate that money.
Right.
And so I think it's hard to see a path forward where taxes over the mid to long term don't rise.
Right. Because I'll have conversations with clients and I'll say, hey, do you believe taxes are going to go up? And they all say yes.
Yeah.
But their conviction level is here and it should be up here.
Yeah.
I think you and I have a conviction level up here because we've kind of dug into the numbers and we see the writing on the wall. Yeah. But I think a lot of people don't understand that, and they don't have the high conviction level that you and I have that taxes will go up.
Well, and Jim, I think the other piece of that is, remember that when we're trying to prepare for retirement, we are preparing against risks.
Right.
The risk is that your taxes are higher in the future than they are today. The risk is that the market doesn't perform as well as you want it to, and that's why you need some diversification. It's not about knowing for sure what will happen. We can't do that. But if taxes were to rise, suddenly you would have less income to spend because more of your money is going to the IRS. What we're trying to do in a good retirement approach is protect against those risks so that if taxes go up in the future, you still have the income you need to live the retirement that you planned.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
So, Congress is debating, now this is an election year, and we'll talk about that in an upcoming episode, but basically, Congress is debating trillions of dollars of tax bills. And, we talked about it a little bit in the last episode, like, they say that if you're under $400,000, it's not going to affect you. Well, we know that's a bunch
of... That's hooey, yeah.
Yeah, hooey. We'll say that politely.
That's the politest podcast word.
So, and so tell us a little bit about like some of the stealth taxes that could happen. We talked a little bit about that in the last episode, but
So let me tell you, one of the things that I think has been most interesting to watch out of Washington over the past maybe 4 to 6 years has been this changing attitude towards retirement savings. And, I bet all of our listeners are like you and me, Jim. When they first got out of college, they got their first paycheck maybe. They could have spent it all, but they didn't because someone, a mentor, a parent, a teacher, a boss said, hey, put a little away for the future. And if you save a little bit for the future, every paycheck, every year, you'll create this retirement nest egg and you will have done the responsible thing. But we've seen a very different attitude coming out of Washington. we are really seeing, particularly with the Biden administration, this idea that somehow Americans that have saved too much money for retirement, too much money that the government has decided, that they're greedy, that they haven't done a responsible thing. They've done a greedy thing. And so the tax code shouldn't incentivize it. The tax code should penalize it. And we've seen some kind of wild proposals floating around Washington. One of which was in the Build Back Better bill, was this new idea that we would take, every saver would take all of their retirement accounts and add up the value, their IRAs, 401k, Roth account, you name it. And if the total value exceeded a limit that Congress set, the government would come in and say, hold on, you've saved too much. And there would actually be a new required minimum distribution applicable at any age equal to 50% of the excess. So essentially what Congress is saying is, hey, if we decide you've saved too much for retirement, every year you have to take out half of whatever's above that limit and pay taxes on it. We don't want that money to grow tax deferred anymore. Mm-hmm. It was a big change. Now that provision did not make it into law. But let me tell you, I spent my early career in Washington. I worked in the White House. I worked on Capitol Hill. Tax proposals never die. They just go on the shelf for future use. And we actually saw that same proposal come back up, rear its head again, as part of President Biden's 2025 budget proposal to Congress. Mm-hmm. So I think we really have to keep a tight eye on changes that the government would make, not just to raise more tax revenue, but specifically to raise more tax revenue from IRAs and 401ks, particularly with higher account balances.
Well, that's where the government wants us to put our money in the first place, so they get the tax revenue. You know, and that's a big deal. So,
the government has stars in its eyes looking at the trillions of dollars of untaxed money sitting in 401ks and IRAs today. And, that's a big area where they can go generate some new taxes. When
Absolutely. So, and I've talked about requirement on distributions. That's a big deal. They could change those factors, right?
Yeah.
And again, there's other things that they could limit the how much you can put into these different retirement accounts, whether it's traditional or Roth. They could also limit Roth conversions.
Yeah.
And God, that would really kind of turn us, on. That would just totally destroy so many of our strategies that we're doing in terms of Roth conversions. That's one thing that you can do now to lock in your tax rates. But you're right, with the legislative risk. I think to me, that's one of the scariest things that I've kind of thought about is them now again, I'm not sure if you've seen, I haven't seen any legislation to limit or get rid of Roth conversions, but I think to your point is that they can change anything at any time.
And that's really, I think, the message that I want to leave people with. We can talk about all this government spending and rising taxes, and it can seem depressing and scary. But there's something we can all do. It's just about diversification. It's interesting. We could have 100% of our retirement assets in Apple stock. Mm-hmm. But most of us don't, because we want to diversify. We want to have some protection if the market is down and participation when the market's up. And that's why most of us have portfolios that are kind of scattered around and diversified amongst different, fixed income, equities, you name it. But on taxes, so many of us are not diversified. And a lot of U.S. savers have the vast majority of their retirement assets in these tax-deferred vehicles. And it's not wrong. It just means that they don't have any protection against the risk of rising taxes. So if there's one message I can leave listeners with, it's that taxes need the same diversification that you have already been working on when it comes to the market and market risk. Right. And that means for most of us, it's going to make sense to have a portion of our retirement assets in a vehicle that is tax-free. Because then we have this hedge that if Congress raises taxes in the future or changes the rules on these tax deferred accounts, at least a portion of our assets are safe. They're locked in at today's rate. We've bought out the IRS and we can be done with them.
Right. And as I talk about my workshops, there are 4 sources of tax-free income that I can think of. Obviously, Roth IRAs are the biggest ones. You and I talk, we use a lot of cash value life insurance. That could be another great source. There's also municipal bonds.
Yep.
And there's also reverse mortgages and reverse mortgage lines of credit. That's the way you can get access to equity on a tax-free basis. But that's about it.
A little plug on the cash value life insurance side. It's interesting you brought that up. We were talking last time we were together about legislative risk, this risk that Congress changes the rules. I personally, I'll let you know, I've got tax deferred money. I've got IRA money. I also have Roth IRA money. And it was important to me to have some Roth money because I wanted to make sure that if my tax bracket rate changed in the future, some portion of my funds wouldn't be affected. But the reason I actually diversified in the tax-free space, another portion of my money into cash value life insurance is because it has something that a Roth doesn't to protect us against legislative risk. And there's nothing wrong with Roths. I love Roths. Right. But a Roth is the same as an IRA in one key way, and that's that it's an account. And when Congress changes the rules on an account, those changes take immediate effect, which means tomorrow Congress could change the rules on my Roth IRA and there's nothing I can do about it. The reason I diversified some of my funds into cash value life insurance as well is life insurance is a contract. Right. And when Congress changes the rules on a contract, they can only change those rules going forward. They can't apply them retroactively to contracts that are already in place. And the courts have upheld this many, many times. So I'm using a Roth IRA to help diversify against tax risk, the risk that my bracket may be higher in the future than planned. And I'm using cash value life insurance to help protect against these legislative changes that Congress might be considering. Because in my cash value life insurance, it doesn't matter if Congress changes the rules on how those are taxed. I'm grandfathered into today's rules and I know what I'll get going forward.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I'm on the same page. My wife and I are maxing out our 401ks. My wife's a federal employee. She had her TSP, and we're in a pretty healthy tax bracket. And, we're putting 100% of our contributions into the Roth. I'm paying my tax bill right now. I literally have lots of less money in my checking account every paycheck because I'm not getting that current year tax deduction. And then I actually sold myself another cash value where I minimize the death benefit, I maximize the premium. So I'm paying the least amount of the cost of insurance as possible. And I'm using that as exactly what you said, as another tax deferred vehicle. And it's, again, not to go down the, rabbit hole of cash value life insurance, but that is one of the most underutilized tools in the toolbox. People, I swear, I talk to multimillionaires say, I don't need life insurance. I'm fine. It's like, you're thinking about death benefit. You're not thinking about all the benefits, the access to capital, that, everything that we're talking about. So that's a really important factor. So anyway, I don't want to, there's other topics we can, other times we can talk about, cash value life insurance, those tax-free accounts. But, the main thing I want to kind of wrapping up this episode is that the debt and the deficits will absolutely have an effect on our investments, on our lifestyle, and our purchasing power. And again, as I always said, listen, it's all about awareness. Once you are aware of the problem, and hopefully you get angry. I tell people, clients, I said, listen, I want you to look at this tax bill and I want you to feel rage, because that will actually motivate you to do something about it. And so I always ask people, say, hey, listen, go on my website, jimmusgrave.com, just scroll down on the homepage and you can get your tax retirement bill. We can just email it to you, and that will show you your estimated taxes that you're going to have to pay in retirement. So anyway, Becky, thank you so much for joining us. And again,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is great. And again, subscribe to our YouTube, follow us on. And by the way, you are also on LinkedIn. We're both linked together. So, link with us, link with Becky on LinkedIn, link with me. And because we're both, she and I are constantly posting great information. And so thank you so much. And we'll see you the next time on Retirement Insights with Jim Musgrave.